Hey everyone, it's Tobes, and welcome to your second monitor. Today is the next video in my series of Avatar: The Last Airbender Commander deck techs. The Avatar set has a huge number of legendary creatures, so I wanted to showcase some of my favorite commander options from among them. I'm releasing a new Avatar Commander deck every Thursday through mid-January when the Lorwyn set drops, in addition to my usual Monday Commander deck tech videos. So if you have a request for a specific Avatar Commander you'd like to see me build, or a way you want to see me build them, let me know in the comments below. As you see, today our commander is Firelord Zuko. The series begins with Prince Zuko of the Fire Nation on the hunt for the Avatar, a task set for him by his distant authoritarian father, so that he can regain his honor and return to his home. Zuko spends the series struggling to figure out who he is and what destiny has in store for him, and his firebending is fueled by the rage and confusion those questions inflict on him. He makes a lot of mistakes, and earns his regrets, particularly with respect to his uncle Iroh, but he does his best to atone for all of it. In the end, he joins the Avatar's side in order to defeat the Fire Nation and set it on the right path, the same way Iroh did with him. Zuko is a complex character with a great redemption arc, and I'm excited to show you what I put together for him, but before we get started, let's go over my deck building template. I like to build my decks around my commander. I want to show off why they're cool and why I put them in the command zone, so I put 30 cards toward doing whatever they want me to do. Our game plan is what we do at the table and how we try to win. 30 more cards go towards supporting that game plan in the form of card advantage, acceleration, and interaction pieces. I usually run 1 or 2 Wraths just to clear the board if we need it, sometimes more if it would play into the game plan, sometimes not at all, but I almost always keep to my floor of 38 lands so I can make sure I hit my land drops and I can cast my spells. So let's talk about our commander. Firelord Zuko is a 2/4 legendary human noble ally for Mardoom mana, a red, a white, and a black. He has 2 abilities. The first is Firebending X, where X is his power, which means when he attacks, we will add X red mana to our pool, and it doesn't empty from our pool until the end of combat. And then, or rather until combat's over. And then, whenever we cast a spell from Exile, and whenever a permanent we control enters from Exile, we put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. That includes Zuko himself. So I love this card. The art shows Zuko at his coronation as Firelord, a title stained by his grandfather, his father, and his sister alike. He declares the end of the century-long war, his trademark scowl completely absent from his face. The Fire Sages revere him, and the gathered crowd cheers for him, but Zuko, once so hungry for honor, is humble. He insists that the real hero is the Avatar, his friend Aang. This is the Zuko that Iroh always saw within him, a Zuko finally at peace with himself. The card's story doesn't end there. We have to go back to the beginning. After his mother's disappearance, Zuko had only the barbed manipulation of his sister and the cold, self-centered regard of his father to feed his heart, and an empathetic word from Zuko during a war council denied him even those. Zuko spent years away from his homeland on a fruitless search. Remember, neither he nor his father Ozai had any reason to think that the Avatar could be found at all, not after the genocide of the air nomads. His uncle accompanied him, trying to guide the angry young man, but Zuko's pain was too great. He had to find the Avatar, to restore his honor, and by proxy, the love of his family. But you can't get water from a stone. Even after his return to the Fire Nation, after his apparent victory over Aang, Zuko felt no better. He had the companionship of May, the approval of his father, his rank reinstated, his future certain. But all he'd regained did nothing to quell his anger because it didn't come with what he really wanted. Acceptance. He visited the imprisoned Iroh in secret, both pleading for guidance and lashing out in frustration. Zuko had all he'd hoped for, but it was not what he needed. Only when he finally made the choice Iroh had begged him to make, when he faced down his father and admitted with a smile that his uncle had gotten to him, was Zuko able to walk his true path. He tracked down Team Avatar and became Aang's firebending teacher. Despite their misgivings, every member of the team gave him a chance to earn their trust, and he did. Not with the strength of his bending or the station of his birth, but by helping them, by putting them before him. His growth helped to further their own, and he showed himself to be the kind of friend they could trust. And when he did, they welcomed him. They wanted him there with them. He chose to be his best self, and for the first time since he lost his mother, someone chose him back. Here, on the day of his coronation, Zuko is at peace. His friend is behind him, echoing the connection between his own grandfather, Sozin, and Avatar Roku. But Zuko is not his grandfather. He's seen the world and felt what it's like to become a part of it, for it to become a part of him. That's the man he brings home to lead the Fire Nation. It's the reason he puts counters on all of our creatures, including himself, when our spells and permanents leave the exile zone. Zuko knows that a rising tide lifts all boats, and with the help of his friends, he means to be that tide. The war is over. The Fire Lord is home from exile. You'll enjoy this deck if you like endless card advantage and being rewarded for it, or if you like seeing the progress that's made when one relies on others and lets them rely on him in turn. So, as usual, this Moxfield list we're going to be going over today is linked in the video's description. At the bottom of the list is a pretty hefty, this time, considering section. If you want to take a look at that section, you'll see a bunch of cards that I thought about putting in this deck, and ultimately, for me, they didn't make the cut. But if you have a bigger budget or a smaller one, if you have a different kind of focus that you want to go with for your version of a Fire Lord Zuko deck, the considering section is a great place to start. But today, we are going to start with the From Exile zone, or tag, that is. We've got 33 cards in this deck that somehow will give us a way for cards to either be cast from exile or for us to have permanents that enter from exile. Basically, this section is all about triggering Zuko and putting counters on all of our things. We don't have a lot of counter support beyond this because we've got 33 cards that do it for us. So we're going to start with Soul Talisman. I'm really excited I got a place to put this card. Soul Talisman is an artifact with no mana cost because you cannot cast it. You can only suspend it. It costs 1 generic mana and you suspend 3, which means we exile it with 3 time counters on it. At the start of our upkeep, we remove a time counter, and when the last time counter is removed, we can cast Soul Talisman without paying its mana cost, which it doesn't have, so we just cast it. And then once it enters, it's a Soul Ring. Taps and adds 2 colorless mana. It's great. Soul Talisman is really neat, especially because we can suspend this on turn 1 if it's in our opening hand. And then turn 3, we've cast our commander, Fire Lord Zuko. And turn 4 is when Soul Talisman will come off of suspend. So yeah, seems really cool that we'd be able to trigger Zuko the turn right after he comes in and have a Soul Ring as a payoff for it. Neat. Next up is Airbender Ascension. Since Aang is in the art for the card, and also Zuko has allied with the Avatar, we have a little bit of airbending in this deck, because it works great with Zuko's trigger. Airbender Ascension is 1 and a white for an enchantment that says when this enchantment enters, airbend up to 1 target creature. It doesn't have the reminder text on this, so to airbend something means to exile it, and its controller may then cast it for just 2 generic mana. Timing restrictions, of course, still apply. Whenever a creature we control enters, Airbender Ascension goes on to say, we put a quest counter on this enchantment. Quest counters don't have an inherent mechanical meaning, they're just used by the card that they're on. And at the beginning of our end step, if this enchantment has 4 or more quest counters on it, we exile up to 1 target creature we control and then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. So it's a teleportation circle, or a conjurer's closet. It lets us flicker something, to blink it, if you want to think of it that way. Which means that not only once we have Airbender's Ascension online, do we get to exile something and return it to the battlefield every end step of ours, which always triggers Zuko, but it enters and we get to airbend something, which means we can hit one of our opponent's creatures, which isn't removal forever, but it is removal for a moment, or we can hit one of our own creatures and recast it for just 2 mana, which means it will enter again and we will be able to trigger Airbender Ascension to put a counter on itself. But not only that, it will trigger Zuko, because airbending something is casting it from exile, and having a permanent enter, because it was exiled and then returned to the battlefield, both of these trigger Zuko. Pretty nice. Next is Dream Devourer. I'm so excited to be able to use this card. I've been staring at this rare since Kaldheim was printed. I really like Kaldheim, and I've just never found a good place for it until now. This is a 0/3 Demon Cleric for 1 and a black that gives each of our non-land cards in our hand, without Foretell, the Foretell mechanic, with a Foretell cost equal to its mana cost reduced by 2 generic mana. So Foretell works like this. During our turn, we can pay 2 generic mana as a special action and exile a card with Foretell face down. Then, on a later turn, we can cast it for its Foretell cost. So Dream Devourer essentially makes all of our spells have Foretell, cost reduced by 2, so it's sort of like we're assuming the card had at least 2 generic mana in its cost, we're sort of prepaying 2 and exiling it face down so our opponents don't know about it, and then we can cast it later for 2 less, and now it's being cast from exile, so we're triggering Zuko. In addition, the Dream Devourer gets +2/+0 every time we foretell a card. Foretelling a card is to say spending 2 and exiling it from our hand. That's not casting it for its foretell cost later, it's just when we exile it for the first time. So yeah, Dream Devourer can become a thing. It can become kind of big if we've got enough mana for it. We could pump a bunch of mana into foretelling several different things. The Dream Devourer becomes, I don't know, a 6/3, and we attack with that. That seems good. Just remember, you can only foretell on your turn. Next is Party Thrasher. I really like this card, even though it's Modern Horizons 3, not that there's anything wrong with that, but because it's clearly on New Capenna, and I'm a big fan of New Capenna. Notice, elves have horns on New Capenna for some reason. So, Party Thrasher is a 1/4 Lizard Wizard for 1 and a red. It gives all of our non-creature spells that we cast from exile Convoke, which means we can tap creatures as part of paying for the cost of those spells. Either those creatures produce a generic mana, or rather pay a generic mana into the cost of that spell, or they provide colored mana, or contribute colored mana, I guess I should say, based on one of the colors that those creatures are. So Party Thrasher itself could contribute red mana. In any case, anything we get into exile, as long as it's not a creature, we can convoke it. And we've got lots of creatures in this deck. In addition, at the beginning of our first main phase, we may discard a card, and if we do, we exile the top 2 cards of our library and choose one of them, and we can play that card this turn. This is called Impulse Draw, the idea of exiling cards and being allowed to play them or cast them for a short amount of time. Party Thrasher lets us exile 2 and choose 1, but it does say we can play it, which means we can play a land from exile this way if we choose a land of the 2 that we exiled. Lands entering from exile will trigger Zuko as well, because Zuko cares about us casting spells from exile or permanents entering from exile. So yeah. Next up is Aranya, Heart of the Spider. This is from the recent Spider-Man set. It's a 3/3 legendary spider human hero for 1 a red and a white that says when we attack, we put a 1/1 counter on target attacking creature. It does not have to be it's not every creature, but as long as we're attacking with any number of creatures, one of them gets a 1/1 counter. And then whenever a modified creature we control deals combat damage to a player, we exile the top card of our library, and we may play that card this turn. So again, this is Impulse Draw. We can play it, so if it's a land, we can play it if we haven't made our land drop yet. And this turn is how long we have to play it by. If we pass the turn and it moves to the next player's turn, we don't get that card anymore, it just remains in exile. But Aranya cares about modified creatures dealing combat damage. Modified creatures are creatures that are enchanted by auras we control, that are equipped by equipment controlled by anyone, or that have any counters on them. And in our deck, we have a few cards that care about modified creatures. Most of the time, we're talking about our creatures that have counters on them. But I do believe we have some equipment in this deck. Nope, never mind. They are in the considering section. In any case, Aranya gives us a chance to have a little bit of card advantage in the form of exile, Impulse Draw, that of course will trigger Zuko if we play permanents or cast spells from exile, and we're going to be attacking so we can get Zuko's Firebending trigger, so putting counters on him is pretty nice. And I want to make mention, Aranya has a when you attack trigger. Firebending is also a when you attack trigger. So both of those will go on the stack at the same time, and since we control both of them, we can put them on the stack in whatever order we want, which means we can put Aranya's trigger on top and have it resolve first. It will put a counter on, let's say, Zuko, and then Zuko's trigger resolves, and he makes an amount of red mana equal to his new power, because we put a counter on him. So a nice way to get a little bit more mana out of Zuko if Aranya's in play. Next we have Eerie Interlude. This is a blink spell, 2 and a white for an instant that says exile any number of target creatures you control, return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So this can only hit our creatures, but it can hit any of our creatures. We probably don't want to hit too many creatures that have a lot of counters on them, but this is a nice way for us to both blink our creatures and also protect our creatures, because this is what I call a slow flicker. It exiles the creatures, but they don't come back until the next end step. We can do this on our opponent's turn to try and save our creatures. If we want to save Zuko and we don't care about his counters as much as we care about not having to recast him, we can hit him with the Eerie Interlude only, and he'll come back at the beginning of the next end step, whether it's that opponent's or, ours, if they somehow skip their end step, I guess. In any case, Eerie Interlude can save our creatures, and it's worth keeping them in play, even if it means losing their counters. Next, we have Murderous Rider. Murderous Rider is an adventure creature. If you haven't seen adventure creatures or adventure cards yet, here's how they work. Murderous Rider is a 2/3 zombie knight for 1 and double black. It has lifelink, and when it dies, it goes on the bottom of its owner's library. It also has an adventure, which is Swift End. For 1 and double black, at instant speed, we can destroy a creature or planeswalker, and then we lose 2 life. So while this is in our hand, we can either play it as the creature side, which means it enters, and it's done. We don't worry about the adventure anymore. Or we can send it on an adventure first, which means we cast Swift End, and as this resolves, it goes to exile. We can then cast the Murderous Rider half of it on whenever we want to from exile, just, of course, at normal timing speed, at sorcery speed. So we can either adventure and then creature, or we can just creature. We can't cast the adventure while the creature's on the battlefield. But what's nice about this is, if we Swift End, the card will go to exile, and we can cast Murderous Rider from exile later on, which of course will trigger our commander. So we get a little removal, and we get a life-linking creature that also puts counters on all of our creatures when we cast it. Next, we have Poison the Cup. This is another Foretell card, but it's got Foretell just printed on it. It is murder, sort of, 1 and double black for an instant that destroys a creature, but if it was Foretold, we also scry 2. Foretell for 1 and a black. So we're having to pay 2, and then on a later turn, 1 and a black, so it's a total of 4 mana to kill something, but we get a scry out of that if we do that. And what's nice about it is, it's a Doomblade on a later turn. It's only 2 mana rather than the 3. So splitting up a larger cost, but splitting it up over 2 turns, can still be to our advantage. Next, we have Professional Facebreaker from Streets of New Capenna. 2 and a red for a 2/3 human warrior with menace that says whenever one or more creatures we control deal combat damage to a player, we create a treasure token. What's nice about that is, it means we wake 1 treasure no matter how many creatures do damage to a player. But if we do damage to a second player at the same time, we get a treasure token for that player as well. It's just not a number of treasures equal to the number of creatures that deal combat damage. It's equal to the number of players we deal combat damage to. That's how it works. And then we can also sacrifice a treasure to exile the top card of our library, and we can play it this turn. Pretty nice, being able to turn treasures into impulse draw, which is another reason why Poison the Cup is very good, because we can scry, so we know what we're going to be exiling if we've got a nice impulse draw that can follow it up. Next, from the Doctor Who decks, we've got Ryan Sinclair. This is a 2/2 legendary human for 2 and a red. When Ryan attacks, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. You may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost if it's a spell with mana value less than or equal to Ryan's power. Put the exiled cards not cast this way on the bottom of your library in a random order, and Ryan has Doctor's Companion, which is not relevant to this deck. So what's great about Ryan is, when we cast spells, with Ryan, we can only cast them for free. Ryan doesn't give us the ability, or the permission, I should say, to cast these spells at all unless we're doing it for free. And then any spells, or any cards that we don't cast, which includes the spell that the first non-land we hit, if we don't cast it with Ryan, everything goes back on the bottom of our library. We don't have to worry about it being gone forever. But every time we do cast something for free with Ryan, or from any other way from exile, or have a permanent enter from exile, it will trigger Zuko and make Ryan get a counter, so Ryan's more and more able to cast things for free with his trigger. Nice. Next we have Tavern Brawler from Baldur's Gate. 2 and a red for a legendary enchantment, Background, which is an enchantment that gives our commander an additional ability. Commander creatures you own have, at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library. This creature gets +X/+O until end of turn, where X is that card's mana value. You may play that card this turn. So we can play it, which means we can play lands from this. And otherwise, we just cast the spell, which essentially is, as long as we've got Zuko and Tavern Brawler on the battlefield, we're basically drawing 2 cards every turn. We can only do the first one this turn, use it however, but if we don't, we're still getting a power boost to Zuko, which may help his Firebending, assuming, whatever card we have exiled with Tavern Brawler has a mana value greater than 0. If it's just a land, Zuko doesn't get a little pump up, but at least we got a land that we can play for our land drop for the turn. And if we drew a land in our draw step, we can just save that for next turn. So yeah, I like Tavern Brawler in this deck. It's one of the few different ways we have to get a consistent impulse draw at the top of our turn or some other part of our turn every turn. Next we have Touch the Spirit Realm. This is 2 and a white for an enchantment that says when it enters, exile up to 1 target artifact or creature until it leaves the battlefield. So it's an Oblivion Ring. It's not Banishing Light because it can only hit artifacts or creatures, but that's still pretty great. However, it also has a channel ability for 1 and a white and discard it, which means we can only activate this while it's in our hand. We exile target artifact or creature, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. This is another one of those slow flickers that we saw like from Eerie Intervention. It's a way for us to ensure that we've protected one of our creatures, maybe even protected Zuko from like a board wipe, because he will go into exile and then return at the start of our next end or the start of the next end step. So thereby missing some other player's Wrath of God or whatever. And whatever we hit with it, it's going to trigger Zuko, including Zuko. I think that's worth looking at specifically, because Zuko says, when you cast a spell from exile, and whenever a permanent you control enters from exile, which means if Zuko is entering from exile, he sees himself enter, which means he will trigger himself and put a 1/1 counter on each creature, including himself. In case you're worried that maybe this doesn't work for Zuko, cards see themselves enter. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to trigger their when this creature enters triggers. So yeah. Touch the Spirit Realm is great because it can protect our creatures, it can trigger Zuko, or it can just be a good removal spell. Next up, I am not a Final Fantasy guy, so if I mispronounce this, please forgive me. We have Kate Sith, I think, Fortune Teller. 3/3 legendary artifact creature Cat Moogle for 3 and a red, with an ability called Lucky Slots. At the beginning of combat on our turn, we scry 1 and then exile the top card of our library. We can play that card this turn. Again, it's play, so we can do lands. And when we exile a card this way, target creature we control gets +X/+O, where X is that card's mana value. So this is Tavern Brawler. It costs 1 more mana, and it's on a body, but it comes with a free scry, and it triggers at the start of combat. So a great place for us to get a scry and maybe find something nice on top of our library, or if we don't, put it on the bottom and go for whatever's next. And maybe we get a nice pump for Zuko, so we can have a bigger Firebending trigger. Pretty neat. Next is the one Planeswalker we're running. One of the best Planeswalker arts I've seen. Good job, Magali. It's Chandra, Torch of Defiance. This is a legendary Chandra Planeswalker with 4 loyalty for 2 and double red, with 4 abilities. The first is +1 loyalty, exile the top card of your library, you may cast that card, which means we have to do it right then as part of the resolution of this ability. And it says cast, which means if we exile a land, it's just going to stay in exile. And if we don't cast it, Chandra deals 2 damage to each opponent. So we're +1ing Chandra to either shock everyone or get a card we can cast right away. We do have to pay for it, it's worth mentioning. We can also +1 Chandra to add 2 red, nothing against that. We can -3 Chandra to do 4 damage to target creature, so a little bit of a flame slash. Or we can -7 her if we can get this high, and we get an emblem with whenever we cast a spell, it does 5 damage to any target. So that's not going to happen. No one at the table is going to let us get up to Ultimate Chandra, Torch of Defiance. But being able to just +1 her each time, either adding mana or activating Zuko somehow, or just doing damage to everyone, pretty sweet. Not activating Zuko, triggering Zuko, pardon me. Next we have Cosmic Intervention. I think this card is so cool. 3 and a white for an instant that says, if a permanent you control would be put into a graveyard from the battlefield this turn, exile it instead. Return it to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So that means if any of our permanents would go to the graveyard, would die, essentially. Instead, we slow flicker them. They just don't go to the graveyard in the first place. They go to exile, and they can come back at the start of our next end step. Which means if we do that in response to a board wipe, let's say, and we have 4 creatures on the battlefield, including Zuko, then all of those creatures won't die, assuming it was a board wipe that would have killed them. Instead, they will go to exile, and they'll all come back at the beginning of the next end step, and Zuko will trigger 4 times, 1 for each creature, because he'll see himself enter, and he'll see all the other ones enter at the same time. So yeah, Cosmic Intervention is sweet. In addition, it's from Kaldheim's Commander series, so it has Foretell for 1 and a white, which means we can just cast it for 2, as long as we've paid the other 2 on a prior turn. Pretty sweet. Court of Lochthwain is next, from Wilds of Eldraine. This is so neat. 2 and double black, for an enchantment that says, when it enters, you become the Monarch. The Monarch is a great mechanic. It's very simple, too. What it means is, you are the Monarch, and the Monarch has 2 rules associated with it. The first is, at your end step, you draw a card. That's all you have to worry about. The second is, if anyone else does combat damage to the Monarch, they become the Monarch. So we would have the monarchy taken away from us if somebody does combat damage to us. And that they want to do that because it'll let them draw a card at their end step. But then we can just take it back by doing combat damage to them. Pretty sweet. Court of Lochthwain also says, at the beginning of our upkeep, we exile the top card of an opponent's library, target opponent. We can play that card as long as it remains exile, and mana of any type can be spent to cast it. So our mana is perfectly fixed because it's mana of any type, not color, and it's not reliant on us continuing to control Court of Lochthwain. Court of Lochthwain could go to the graveyard if we want. It could leave the battlefield, and we still have permission to play the card we exiled, or cards we exiled, since this triggers every one of our upkeeps, as long as they're in exile. In addition, if we're the Monarch, until end of turn, we can cast a spell from among cards exiled with this enchantment without paying its mana cost. So, stealing things from our opponents, casting them for free maybe, and then drawing a card at the end step, sounds great. Next up, from the Warhammer 40k product, it's Dark Apostle. 3 and a red for a 3/3 creature Astartes warrior with the Gift of Chaos. For 3 and tap, the next non-creature spell you cast this turn has Cascade. Cascade means when we cast that non-creature spell, we exile cards from the top of our library until we exile a card that costs less, and we can cast that card that costs less without paying its mana cost, and then everything else we exile goes on the bottom in a random order. So that means Gift of Chaos, if we activate this, and then we cast a non-creature spell, we're going to trigger Zuko, because we're going to find a card, a non-land card, or we're going to find a spell that costs less, assuming we didn't cast, what do we have that costs 0? Nothing, other than Soul Talisman, which we can cast off of Cascade if we want to. So if we haven't already suspended Soul Talisman, Dark Apostle lets us ensure we're going to be able to cast something if we have a non-creature spell we can cast to have Cascade from Dark Apostle's ability. What's nice about this, and a couple of different ways to mention how this is useful, is we have ways to cast things at instant speed, of course, as we've seen. We can channel at instant speed, we can cast an instant that we foretold, or just cast it on its own at instant speed, or we can activate Dark Apostle's ability, paying the 3 at instant speed. All of that we can use Zuko's mana for. If he firebends, and he makes, let's say he doesn't have any counters on him, he just makes 2 mana, we can spend that as long as we do it during combat, and we add 1 more to it and tap the Dark Apostle, and then the next non-creature spell we cast this turn has Cascade. Doesn't have to be cast during this combat. As long as we cast it before the turn is over, it will Cascade. So this is one of the nice ways we have as a mana sink, a way for us to spend our extra mana, especially the mana that Zuko generates that's only good during combat. Next we have Decadent Dragon. Decadent Dragon is a 4/4 dragon for 2 and double red. It has flying and trample, and when it attacks we make a treasure. A little bit of ramp for us. And it's beautiful Wiley Beckert art. It's also an adventure creature, which again means if we cast it as it's an expensive taste adventure, we can then cast the Decadent Dragon from Exile, which will trigger Zuko. Expensive Taste is an instant for 2 and a black that says exile the top 2 cards of an opponent's library face down. You may look at it and play those cards for as long as they remain exiled. So similarly to Court of Lochthwain, those cards are going to stay in exile for the rest of the game until we cast them. Pretty neat. It does say play, rather, so we don't even have to cast them. If they're lands, we can play them too, just as our land drop. So Expensive Taste, a nice way to just 3 mana draw 2, and since it's at instant speed, we can use Zuko's Firebending mana on this and just spend a black from our mana base. Pretty good. If I remember correctly, this deck has 15 cards that can be cast at instant speed, and 1 land that has an adventure on it as well. So 16 different cards we can cast at instant speed, all of which mean we have ways for us to use our commander's Firebending mana without having to use, like activated abilities like Dark Apostle has. Next up is Headliner Scarlet from the Clue product. This is a 3/3 legendary human warlock for 3 and a red. Headliner Scarlet has haste. When she enters, creature's target player controls can't block this turn, which means we can just attack that player. They don't get to block. Zuko's going to trigger. We're going to get all of our good stuff off of that. Yeah, this is just sweet evasion for us. And at the beginning of our upkeep, we exile the top card of our library face down, and we can look at it and play it this turn. So this is impulse draw. It does mean we have to do it this turn, but we can play that card, which means casting spells or playing land, and we are exiling it face down, which is interesting. Normally, exile, unless it specifies otherwise, is always face up, but Headliner Scarlet lets us be sneaky about it, so that's cool. Maybe we have like a combat trick that we want to hold up until it's time. Neat. Next, we have Prosper Tomebound. If you have played decks that are black and red that have exile in them, you've probably seen Prosper. This is from the Forgotten Realms Commander product, and only printed in foil, interestingly. One of our more expensive cards in the deck, but Prosper is a 1/4 legendary Tiefling Warlock for 2 a black and a red. Prosper has Death Touch and 2 abilities. Mystic Arcanum is at the beginning of our end step, we exile the top card of our library and we can play it until the end of our next turn. So we have 1 whole turn to do this, but it's exiled starting at our end step. It does say play, however, which means we can do land with this. And Pact Boon, whenever you play a card from exile, create a treasure token. So lots and lots of ways for us to make treasure, since this is basically what we're doing throughout the deck, just to make our commander go off. Again, we have 33 cards that we can play this way, or that will do this somehow, so Prosper is going to give us lots and lots of treasures. Next up is Restoration Angel. Love Resto Angel. 3 and a white for a 3/4 angel with flash and flying, and when it enters, we may exile target non-angel creature we control, then return that card to the battlefield under our control. So we flash in the Restoration Angel, and we flicker something. It's not a slow flicker, creature comes back right away, but it protects them from, a Doomblade, or a Path to Exile, or a Lightning Bolt, or whatever was targeting our creature. Restoration Angel protects our creature, or maybe we just want our creature to come back into play. In any case, it's going to flicker it, which will trigger Zuko. Interestingly, I just made mention of Lightning Bolt. Zuko, in this deck, is a 2/4, which is really cool because it means he doesn't die to Lightning Bolt anymore. I don't know, I think that's neat. Next up, we have Salt Skidder. 3 and a white for a 3/4 worm, it's gross, from Future Sight, that says whenever another creature enters, exile this creature, return this creature to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So Salt Skidder slow flickers itself, and it does it every time any other creature enters. It doesn't say whenever another creature you control enters, or enters under your control. So Salt Skidder, in all likelihood, is going to slow flicker itself pretty much every turn for every player, which means every time it enters at the end step, when it comes back in, we're going to get a trigger from Zuko. So we're going to get lots and lots and lots of counters. It's just we're never going to be able to keep them on Salt Skidder. Seems neat. Next we have Wand of Wonder. This is the Rod of Wonder from Dungeons & Dragons, but printed in Battle for Baldur's Gate. 3 and a red for an artifact that says pay 4 generic mana and tap, which is again means this is a great way for us to use our Firebending mana, and we roll a 20-sided die, a d20. Each opponent exiles cards from the top of their library until they exile an instant or sorcery, then shuffles the rest into their library. We can cast up to X instants and or sorceries from among those cards this way without paying their mana cost. So this is each opponent, so we're not doing it for ourselves, and it's only instants and sorceries. But nobody loses any cards, just the first instant or sorcery they find, we're going to get to cast at least one of them. We roll the d20, and if we roll a 1 to 9, we get to cast one spell. If we roll a 10 to 19, we get to cast 2 of those spells. And if we roll a natural 20, we get to cast all 3 spells. Now, it may be the case that we see some counter spells in there, which maybe we don't want to cast. But it says we may cast up to X. So we don't have to cast any or all of these. But if we get some spells, we should. We've just spent 4 mana on it, even if that mana is something that Zuko gives us every turn. So using the Wand of Wonder gives us a nice way for us to cast some spells from Exile, and of course trigger Zuko repeatedly. Next up, also from Baldur's Gate, it's Commander Liara Porter. This is a 5/3 legendary human soldier, 4/3 a red and a white, that says whenever we attack, spells we cast from Exile this turn cost X generic mana less to cast, where X is the number of players being attacked. So if we're only attacking one opponent, all of our spells we cast from Exile that turn cost 1 less. If we're attacking all 3 opponents, all of our spells cast from Exile this turn cost 3 generic mana less. Commander Liara Porter wants us to attack more people, but we only have to attack 1. A discount of 1 is still pretty good. Plus, as part of the same trigger, we exile the top X cards of our library, and until the end of turn, we can cast spells from among those exiled cards. So we can only cast spells from among those cards, which means we can't play any lands that we have exiled, but we can do it until end of turn. And when we do, they all cost less based on how many players we attacked. Neat. Next from Bloomburrow is Dragonhawk, Fate's Tempest. This is a 5/5 legendary bird dragon. It's a bird and a dragon for 3 and double red. It flies, and when Dragonhawk enters or attacks, both, we exile the top X cards of our library, where X is the number of creatures we control with power 4 or greater. This might just be Dragonhawk, because Dragonhawk is a 5/5, but it might be all of our creatures if we've gotten a lot of counters on our creatures. We may then play those cards until our next end step. And at the beginning of our next end step, Dragonhawk deals 2 damage to each opponent for each of those cards that are still exiled, which means Dragonhawk is basically doing an impression of Chandra Torture Defiance. We get to exile several different cards, and we have until the end of turn to play them, and if we don't, they're staying in exile, and every one of our opponents is eating a shock for each of those cards. Pretty neat. Next up is Kami of Celebration from Neon Dynasty Commander. 4 and a red gives us a 3/3 spirit that says whenever a modified creature we control attacks, exile the top card of your library, you may play the card this turn. So again, it lasts all turn, and it's a play, so we can play our lands in addition to casting our spells. And it's anytime any of our modified creatures, so any of our creatures with counters on them, we get to exile cards from the top of our library. This is like, there's a reason why we do have a section labeled Draw, which is our card advantage section, but most of our card advantage in this deck comes from Impulse Draw in the form of these exiling cards and being able to cast them or play them in a certain specified amount of time. In addition, whenever we cast a spell from exile, we put a 1/1 counter on one of our creatures. Sweet. Kami of Celebration gives us an extra counter in addition to the counters that Zuko puts on everything. Sounds good to me. One thing I do want to make mention of, though, is even though it looks like it, doesn't fly. Next up is, we do have another Planeswalker. It's Quintorius Khand. This is from Lost Caverns of Ixalan. 3, a red and a white, gives us a legendary Quintorius Planeswalker with 4 starting loyalty and a static ability. Whenever we cast a spell from exile, Quintorius deals 2 damage to each opponent, and we gain 2 life. Now, gaining 2 life is pretty sweet, but being able to burn to shock each of our opponents every time we cast a spell from exile, that's going to come up over and over and over. And what's nicest about it is it only works on casting spells, which seems like it's not so nice because we want to be able to play our lands from exile and trigger Zuko as well. But we can say to our opponents, look, I'm just getting counters. At least I'm not burning you all this time. I don't think they'll buy that, but they might. For +1, we can make a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. So a nice way to get a couple of extra tokens into play. We have 32 creatures in our deck, including our commander, and I think 10 different cards that make tokens. Quintorius is one of them. We can -3 him to discover 4. Discover is pretty similar to Cascade, but the way it works is rather than looking for a mana value that is below the number, we're looking for a mana value of 4 or less. We exile cards from the top of our library until we find something mana value 4 or less. We may then cast it without paying its mana cost, or we may put it in our hand. But either way, all of the cards that we exiled otherwise go on the bottom of our library in a random order. So Quintorius, at least when he first comes in, can trigger Zuko by discovering 4. And then we'll have to build him back up to do it again. But if we get to the point where we can ultimate Zuko, or Quintorius rather, for -6, we can exile any number of target cards from our graveyard. We put a red mana into our pool for each card we exile this way, and we can play those cards this turn. It's play, so that means we can play a land for our land drop. We've got a whole bunch of mana that maybe we can spend it on. Just a nice way to get some value out of our graveyard. And if we don't, we just keep pumping out spirits and keeping Quintorius in play to burn our opponents and gain us life, and occasionally discover 4. Next is Sozin's Comet. 3 and double red for a sorcery that says each creature you control gains Firebending 5 until end of turn, which means Zuko will have Firebending 5 plus X. He'll technically have Firebending 5 and another instance of Firebending, which is Firebending X, but we just think of it as when he attacks, he'll get triggers, and when those triggers resolve, he'll have X plus 5, he will have added X plus 5 red mana to our pool that lasts through the end of combat. And we can foretell Sozin's Comet for 2 and a red, meaning we're paying 2 of this up front, and then later we can cast this at sorcery speed, of course, for 2 and a red. Too bad it's not an instant, but we really want to cast this before combat so that all of our creatures get an enormous amount of firebending and a lot of mana in our pool that we can use during that combat. Hopefully we have some mana sinks that let us use it over and over, of which we have a few. We'll see them soon. Next is, I really like Urabrask. It's a Streets of New Capenna card, so of course I like it, but Urabrask Heretic Praetor is 3 and double red for a 4/4 legendary Phyrexian Praetor. Urabrask has haste, and at the beginning of our upkeep, we exile the top card of our library, and we may play it this turn. So again, it's play, it lasts all turn, it's just a little bit of impulse draw. It helps us, we're drawing an extra card essentially, we just can only do it this turn. However, at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, the next time they would draw a card this turn, instead they exile the top card of their library, and they may play it this turn. Which means it turns their draw step into an impulse draw step. The top card of their library is exiled, they can only play it this turn, and it's face up. So we know what it is, and they're not going to be able to hold on to it whenever they want to use it. So if it's a counter spell, as long as someone's not casting a spell this turn on their turn, they're not countering anything. So yeah, turning everyone's draw for their draw step into an impulse draw is really annoying, and getting an extra one for ourselves is not bad, because it doesn't just give us an extra card that we have advantage of, it also triggers our commander. So Urabrask is pretty annoying, which means Urabrask is going to be removal bait. A lot of people are going to say, wow, Zuko is really powerful and it's pumping up all your creatures, but I hate not being able to just put my card in my hand. I'm going to use my kill spell on Urabrask, which is great. It means he's drawn removal away from our commander or from our other powerful creatures. Next up, we have Virtue of Loyalty. This is an enchantment with an adventure. Virtue of Loyalty is 3 and double white for an enchantment that says at the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control and untap those creatures. So it's not vigilance, but it might as well be. We attack with Zuko, let's say, we get to attack, we get to cast our spells using his firebending, assuming he doesn't die. At the end step, all of our creatures, including Zuko, are going to get a counter and get untapped. So adding to our counters that Zuko is putting on everything, Virtue of Loyalty helps out all of our creatures and makes it so it's easier for them to attack because we don't have to worry about holding up blockers. In addition, we've got an instant adventure in Ardenvale Fealty, which is just create a 2/2 white knight creature token with vigilance. So we make a 2/2 knight with vigilance. It's an instant, so we can do this during combat if we want to, using Zuko's Firebending mana on this one generic here. So we're kind of getting a 2/2 with Vigilance for 1. And then post-combat, we don't get to keep our Firebending mana, but assuming we've got 5 mana sticking around, we can immediately play Virtue of Loyalty, trigger Zuko, putting a counter on everything since we're casting a spell from Exile, and then Virtue enters, we go to our end step, Virtue triggers, we put another counter on everything, and we untap everything. Pretty sweet. Next, it's just so easy. It's Etali Primal Storm. It's so great. He's in Foundations. He's 15 cents. Go play with Etali. He's so much fun. 4 and double red for a 6/6 legendary Elder Dinosaur. Look at how big this is. When Etali attacks, we exile the top card of each player's library, and then we may cast any number of spells from among those cards without paying their mana costs. That means everyone exiles the top card of their library. It's each player, not each opponent. And then we can cast any number of spells from among them for free. We can't do anything with lands, but it's pretty often you get to see 3 or 4 spells and cast all of them. And you don't get to cast them through for the rest of the turn, you cast them right away. It's part of the resolution of this ability, which means if we're attacking with Etali and with Zuko, we let the Etali trigger resolve first. We cast any spells that we exile off of everyone's libraries. Each time we do, we're casting something from Exile, so we're triggering Zuko, putting a counter on everything, including Etali and Zuko himself. And then, once we've resolved all of Etali's spells that we get to cast, Zuko's ability, his Firebending, goes off, and now Zuko is bigger because of all the counters we just put on him. And we get to get more Firebending mana. Pretty sweet. Also, Etali's just a lot of fun. Next up, we have Pegasus Guardian, another adventure creature. The Guardian itself is 5 and a white for a Pegasus with flying. It's a 3/3. And it says, at the beginning of our end step, if a permanent we controlled left the battlefield this turn, we create a 1/1 white Pegasus creature token with flying. Which means if we had a creature die, if we airbent a creature, if we flickered a creature, whatever it may be, anything, any of our permanent, if we sacrifice something, because we might have treasures that we sacrifice, it doesn't say a non-land permanent. As long as we have any of our permanents leave the battlefield, at the end step, the Pegasus Guardian will make us a 1/1 flyer. Pretty great. And we can rescue the foal, an instant speed adventure for 1 and a white, so again, we can use Firebending mana on the generic mana cost, to exile target creature we control and then return that creature to the battlefield under its owner's control. It's just a flicker. It lets us not just trigger Zuko by flickering one of our creatures, since it has entered from exile, but also we can trigger Zuko again by casting the Pegasus Guardian once Rescue the Foal has resolved and put the Pegasus Guardian card into exile. We cast it from exile, trigger Zuko again, we go to our end step, the Guardian itself triggers, we get a creature with flying, pretty great. Last of all, it's another Final Fantasy card. It's Kefka Dancing Mad. I don't know what this guy's deal is, but he looks like he's having either a good or bad time, maybe both. Kefka is a 6/6 legendary human wizard for 5, a black, and a red that says, during your turn, Kefka has Indestructible. Good luck, everyone. And at the beginning of your end step, exile a card at random from each opponent's graveyard. This is super annoying. It means they have to pick up their graveyard, flip it over, shuffle it, and then we pick a random card from it. There's other ways to randomize, especially if someone's playing something with a Graveyard Order Matters card, but in any case, we exile a card at random from each opponent's graveyard. We may cast any number of spells from among those cards exiled without paying their mana costs. And then each player who owns a spell we cast this way loses life equal to its mana value. So this is a sweet in-step trigger. If Kefka survives and isn't exiled or, destroyed on someone else's turn, we're probably going to get some good stuff. We do exile cards at random from each opponent's graveyard, and we only get to cast spells. So if an opponent has lands in their graveyard and that's what we exile, too bad. But if that happens, or if we choose not to cast any of their spells, those spells stay in exile. The only reason they would go back to their graveyard is if they have resolved since we cast them. Then they go back to the graveyard from that. So we're able to get big spells as big as we're able to. We want to be able to cast the biggest ones. Of course, we don't really get to choose, it's random, but we hope to get the biggest stuff so we not only get a lot of value out of it, we make our opponents lose life equal to the mana value of those bigger spells. So that's what we're hoping for. Not to mention, of course, all of that will trigger Zuko. So that is an awful lot of spells, and I think we covered all of them. Yeah, looks like. Those are all the spells that we cast from Exile, and that's enough to talk about our game plan. So we're going to talk about several different categories that supplement our game plan, but before we do, we want to talk about these support categories, starting with card advantage. So as usual, I use the tag draw here just to stand in for the idea of card advantage. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of these cards draw us cards, but we have a lot of actual card advantage in the form of impulse draw in our From Exile section. So we don't have to worry about having enough cards available to us to cast or play at all. But we do have a few cards that will do something that's not just impulse draw. Starting with Bannon the Returner's Leader, again from the Final Fantasy Commander product. For a red and a white, we get a 1/3 legendary human cleric rebel with the ability to pray. Once during each of our turns, we may cast a creature spell from among cards in our graveyard that were put there from anywhere other than the battlefield this turn. So if we discarded a card, is really what we're looking at this for. Because whenever we attack, we may pay a generic mana and discard a card, and if we do, we draw a card. So this is us, when we attack, it's not when Bannon attacks, it's just when we attack, so any number of creatures declared as attackers, we get the trigger, and we can pay a generic mana to discard and draw. That's rummaging. But it means, thanks to this Prey ability, assuming Bannon survives combat, post-combat, we can cast a creature spell that's in our graveyard that didn't get there from the battlefield, which means we want to discard a creature if we can. We pay 1, discard a creature, draw a card, and then post-combat, we can cast that creature from our graveyard. So even though it looks like we're down a card and up a card, so we're not actually getting any advantage, we can cast that creature spell from our graveyard. So it's like it's still in our hand as far as we're concerned. So really, we just paid 1 and drew a card, assuming we could discard a creature. And if we couldn't, well, we just don't pay this and discard a card. Easy. Yeah. Next up is Dusk Legion Duelist. During my notes for this video, I wrote Dusk Legion Zealot, which is a 2-drop black creature. And I've seen some articles on Zuko include Dusk Legion Duelist and call it Dusk Legion Zealot. So I just think that's funny. Anyway, this is a 2/2 vampire soldier for 1 and a white. It has vigilance, and when 1 or more 1/1 counters are put on the duelist, we draw a card. It just once per turn. Which means we've got lots of ways to get counters on our creatures, but mostly it's just Zuko. So if we cast a spell from Exile or have a permanent enter from Exile, we're going to get a counter on the duelist if Zuko's in play, and we're going to draw a card. Only once per turn, but 1 card every turn is probably what we're going to have. Next up is Mind Stone. Mind Stone is really more of a mana rock. It's 2 generic mana for an artifact that taps for colorless, but we can pay 1, tap it, and sacrifice it to draw a card. So in all likelihood, this is going to be here to add to our mana, but we have the ability to crack it and draw if we need to later in the game, worth noting. Next is Lauren of the Third Path. 2 and a white for a 2/1 legendary human artificer with vigilance, and when she enters, she destroys up to 1 target artifact or enchantment. So Lauren comes with a free disenchant. She's a good removal spell. We can also, however, tap her, and then we and a target opponent each draw a card. So repeatable card draw for us as long as we're willing to let one of our opponents draw a card. This is a great political tool. We can say, all right, I would like to let you draw a card, opponent A. Will you ignore me for the next turn? Will you just not attack me, and I'll give you a free card draw? And they'll say, well, you're going to have to do that anyway. And you can say, no, we have a lot of impulse draw. We don't have to just straight up get card draw here, but we want to. We want to be your ally. We want you to leave us alone, and we'll pay you for it with a card. It doesn't have to be forever, just 1 turn cycle. And they might be like, yeah, okay, I wasn't planning to attack you anyway. And we say, great, we have a deal. And we draw a card, and they leave us alone. Pretty fun. Next is Big Score. I love Big Score. 3 and a red for an instant that says as an additional cost to cast a spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards, make 2 treasures. Pretty great. It's just thrill of possibility, but it costs 2 more, and we get that 2 refunded in the form of treasures. Pretty cool. Also notable, we have a few different ways to discard cards in this deck, and all of them will work with Bannon. Bannon gives us the ability to cast creature spells once during each of our turns, as long as those creature spell cards were put into our graveyard from somewhere other than the battlefield. they don't have to come from his own discard ability. So if we cast Big Score with Bannon in play, and we discard a creature, we can use Bannon to cast that creature from our graveyard, and maybe we even use the treasures from Big Score to do it. Sweet. We've already seen Court of Locthwain. Court of Locthwain lets us have card advantage in the form of our of becoming the monarch. You know, we'll go to our end step after we play the Court of Locthwain. No one will have done combat damage to us before then, so we draw a card. At least we're getting one card off of this. We might get multiples if we stay the monarch or become the monarch again. Dark Apostle, of course, lets us cascade into something, which is us casting a spell and getting an additional spell on top of it, so that's card advantage. Solemn Simulacrum is great. This is the sad robot. For 4 generic mana, we get a 2/2 artifact creature golem. When it enters, we Rampant Growth. We search our library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. And when it dies, we may draw a card. So we're going to want to. Solemn Simulacrum enters. Hopefully we have gotten it to enter from Exile, so we've already triggered Zuko, we've ramped ourselves. If it dies, or if we sacrifice it somehow, we get to draw a card off of it. Love it. Next is Unexpected Windfall. Unexpected Windfall is exactly the same card as Big Score, except rather than costing 3 in a red, it costs 2 in double red. So a little bit more restrictive cost, but otherwise the same thing. Discard a card as an additional cost for an instant that draws 2 and makes 2 treasures. Pretty good. Finally, we have Rabble Rousing. 4 and a white for an enchantment with Hideaway 5. What this means is, when this enters, we look at the top 5 cards of our library, one of them gets exiled face down under Rabble Rousing, and we put the rest on the bottom in a random order. And then, whenever we attack with one or more creatures, we make a number of 1/1 green and white citizen creature tokens equal to the number of creatures we have attacking. And then, if we happen to control 10 or more creatures, whether or not any of them are attacking, I mean, obviously at least one's going to be, but no matter what the attacking or not status of our creatures is, if we control 10 or more, we can play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. Play means we can play a land if we haven't made a land drop yet. If that's what we exiled, hope it's not. Hopefully we exiled something really good, and so we get to cast that for free as part of this attack. We don't have to worry about the timing restrictions on it. It's pretty great. And Rabble Rousing is an excellent way for us to get more and more and more tokens, all of which are going to get counters thanks to Zuko. Especially because we just made some tokens, and then we're playing something from Exile. So yeah. So that covers our card advantage section. Let's look at our acceleration, which again I've just shorthand tagged as ramp. We've already seen the Soul Talisman, how it gives us a Soul Ring in 3 turns, but what if we wanted a Soul Ring now? Soul Ring is a 1 mana artifact that taps for 2 colorless. We want it in our deck, it's so powerful. It's the symbol of the format. Similarly, we definitely want this Arcane Signet. It's a 2 mana rock. It's an artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity, which means in this deck, it taps for white or red or black. So Arcane Signet is 2 mana untapped rock. It gives us exactly what we need. Yeah, we want that. Next up, we have Mind Stone. We've already seen the Mind Stone. It taps for colorless mana, and it's a 2 mana rock. Pretty good. Next, we have 3 talismans. We'll look at the Talisman of Conviction. These all work the same way. They are a 2 mana rock, an artifact that taps for colorless, or we can tap them for 1 of 2 colors if we're willing to let it do 1 damage to us. Usually, the way you look at this is it's worth it, because normally we're going to be just tapping this for colorless mana, since we have plenty of colored mana production in our other ramp pieces and in our land base. But if we really need 1 specific color, it's worth paying 1 life, or losing 1 life to the damage, to get that color. Most of the time, we won't be using it for colors at all, but even if we spend, I don't know, we lose like 6 or 7 life over the course of the game, that means we've always had the mana we needed, and it's worth it. So yeah, works both for us either way. Talisman of Conviction taps for Boros mana, red or white. Talisman of Hierarchy taps for Orzhov mana, white or black. And Talisman of Indulgence taps for Rakdos mana, red or black. Next, we have Bender's Waterskin. This is a 3 mana Manalith, which is to say it's a 3 mana artifact that taps for 1 mana of any color. But also, we can untap it, or we do untap it rather, during each other player's untap step. So it always has a mana available for us. That's great for the instant speed things we do, as well as for being able to activate abilities, if we have activated abilities that we want to activate on other people's turns. Pretty great for us. I decided to include this rather than the 2-mana rock that taps for any color that an opponent's lands could produce. I know everyone's kicking me for not remembering what it's called right off the top of my head. I am as well, don't worry. I'll think of it soon, don't worry. Yeah, Professional Facebreaker is next. We've already seen it. It makes treasure every time our creatures do damage to a player. Big Score, of course, makes us treasures as well. Chandra can add 2 red mana every time we +1 her, if we +1 her with her second ability. Decadent Dragon, whenever it attacks, we make a treasure token. Prosper makes a treasure for us every time we play a card from Exile. Sad Robot comes in and Rampant Growths us, and Unexpected Windfall, just like Big Score, makes us 2 treasures. So yeah, that is our acceleration section. Let's talk now about interaction. We are primarily a red deck, so of course we're running Lightning Bolt. A single red for an instant that deals 3 damage to any target. You can't ask for much more than that, especially not from red. And you don't have to run the Mystical Archive printing of Lightning Bolt, but it's my favorite. Next are Path to Exile and Swords to Plowshares, one of which is one of the best removal spells of all time. These are both very similar cards. They're both 1 white mana for an instant that exiles a target creature and gives the creature's controller a kickback. Swords to Plowshares gives that creature's controller life equal to the power of the exiled creature, and Path to Exile lets that creature's controller Rampant Growth. They search your library for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. Both of these are excellent. Swords to Plowshares is much better, but when it comes to 1 mana removal spells, we want to run both of these. Airbender Ascension is a removal spell, albeit a soft one, because it can airbend 1 target creature when it comes in. They get to recast that, but it's not around once we've airbent it. So yeah, they'll have to wait till their next turn for it to come back. Emergency Eject is next. This is a 3 mana spell at instant speed that lets us destroy target non-land permanent, and its controller creates a Lander token. Lander token is an artifact with the ability to pay 2 generic mana, tap it, and sacrifice it to Rampant Growth. Search your library for a basic, put it on the battlefield tapped, and shuffle. I've said this in other videos, but I know some people like to run Generous Gift. Generous Gift is a same cost for an instant that destroys a permanent, so it can hit lands, and it gives that permanent's controller a 3/3 green elephant creature token. Usually, since I'm not trying to do land destruction in my spell base, I go for something that targets a non-land permanent, and I was running Stroke of Midnight for that to give them a 1/1 creature, but I think Emergency Eject is better because it gives them a token that they have to pay mana into to get a tapped basic. So even though this is 2 more mana than Path to Exile, it can hit other permanent types other than creatures, and they have to pay their own mana into the lander to even get the land out of it. So comparable, kind of, maybe a little. Lorn of the Third Path enters and disenchants an artifact or enchantment. Murderous Rider has the Swift End Adventure to destroy a creature or planeswalker, so that's our planeswalker removal here, beyond just Lightning Bolt and Emergency Eject. Poison the Cup is murder, essentially. Touch the Spirit Realm is an exile until it leaves the battlefield effect, like Oblivion Ring. And of course, Chandra, we can -3 to do 3 damage to target creature. Or if we can emblem her, we can do 5 damage to any target every time we cast a spell. That's not going to happen, but we can sure dream. So that covers our interaction section. We are running 1 Wrath because we're in Mardu colors, so we want to run Ruinous Ultimatum. Ruinous Ultimatum is double red, double black, and triple white for a sorcery that destroys all non-land permanents your opponents control. Sure, if you want to put this deck together and you want to run Day of Judgment or Cleansing Nova or some other cheaper, much more easy to cast Wrath, go for it. I won't judge you for it. But every time I get a chance to run a Mardu deck, this is one of the coolest spells from Ikoria, at least, and there's a lot of cool spells in Ikoria. I'm going to run this Ultimatum. So yeah, that's where I am on a Wrath. So that covers our support cards. We're going to talk about our supplemental cards, the sections of the deck that are meant to help out the game plan and really are part of it without being the center part. So we're going to start with our payoff cards. This is 10 cards that all reward us for doing what we were going to do anyway, like Dusk Legion Duelist. We were going to put counters on our creatures anyway, so as long as Dusk Legion Duelist is one of them, we draw a card every time that happens, just once each turn. Next we have PNLR, Consul of Revival from March of the Machine Aftermath. A red and a white gives us a 2/3 legendary human artificer that gives all of our Thopters haste. What are Thopters? Well, whenever we play a land from exile or cast a spell from exile, we make a 1/1 colorless Thopter, artifact creature token with flying. So a 1/1 flying artifact creature that has haste, because Pia gives all of our Thopters haste. And that happens every time we do the things we were going to do anyway, which is play lands from exile and cast spells from exile. Abzan Falconer is next. 2 and a white for a 2/3 human soldier with Outlast for 1 white, which means for 1 white and tap, we can put a 1/1 counter on the Falconer, but only as a sorcery. That's not why it's in here. It's here because each creature we control with a +1/+1 counter on it has flying. So Zuko puts counters on all of our creatures, and now all of our creatures fly with the Falconer out. That is terrifying in a Mardu deck. Being able to have all of our creatures get +1 power and toughness, thanks to their counter, and then immediately swing in the air when someone didn't expect it, that sounds pretty great. Envoy of the Ancestors is next. 2 and a white for a 2/3 human cleric, also with Outlast for 1 white, but it says modified creatures you control have lifelink. So all of our creatures with counters, or if we had auras we control or equipment attached to them, they're modified, so they have lifelink. Another nice way for us to benefit from what we were doing anyway, which is putting counters on our creatures. Next up is Iraxa, Empress of Mars. I hope I said that right. If I didn't, and you are a Doctor Who fan, let me know in the comments below how to say it correctly. Don't just let me know I got it wrong. For 2 and double red, we get a 5/4 legendary alien warrior with trample and with battle cry, which means when Iraxa attacks, each other attacking creature gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So that means if we're attacking with Iraxa and Zuko, we can stack the triggers so that battle cry resolves first, Zuko's power goes up, and Zuko now makes more mana with his Firebending trigger. Also, Iraxa has a paradox ability. Whenever we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, which means whenever we cast a spell from exile, not play a land, but cast a spell, we get a 2/2 red alien warrior creature token. So we're going to be doing a lot of this anyway. It is worth recognizing that we also have that guy that lets us cast creature spells from our graveyard. What's his name? Is it Bannon? Yeah. Bannon lets us cast creature spells from our graveyard. So that is a place that is not from our hand. So Iraxa will give us an alien 2/2 from that as well. So making more tokens so that we can put more counters on them. And we're getting those just because we're casting spells from somewhere other than our hand, which is usually Exile in this deck. Yeah, helps us in 2 ways. Prosper, of course, gives us a treasure every time we play a card from exile. Kami of Celebration gives us a 1/1 counter on one of our creatures when we cast a spell from exile. And when our modified creatures attack, we get to exile a type card of our library, and we can play that this turn. Pretty good. Quintorius has his static ability. When we cast spells from exile, Quint will do 2 damage to every opponent and will gain 2 life. Rabble Rousing rewards us with tokens that we want every time we attack with a bunch of creatures, because we want to go wide. And Pegasus Guardian rewards us with a 1/1 flyer as long as our creatures left the battlefield this turn, or any of our permanents rather. We've got lots of ways for that to happen. So that covers our payoffs. What about its sister category, synergies? We have a lot more of both of these in the considering section, but we're going to talk right now about Party Thrasher synergy, which is to say, giving all of our non-creature spells that we cast from exile convoke. So we have lots of ways to make creatures. We have a lot of creatures and a lot of tokens in this deck. Turning all of this non-creature spells that we're casting from exile into convocable ones means we've got synergy there. Tavern Brawler and Kate Sith both have a similar thing going on. Tavern Brawler triggers at our upkeep, Kate Sith at the start of our combat, but both don't just exile a card and let us cast it this turn, or play it this turn. Play it? It's play for both, right? Yeah, play for both. They also both give a power bonus to Zuko right before Zuko can attack, which means Zuko is going to be able to firebend bigger, so a little synergy there. And of course, Salt Skitter triggers Zuko every time any other creature comes into play. Or rather, goes to exile every time any other creature comes into play, and then will return at the next end step and trigger Zuko then. So lots more Zuko triggers with Salt Skitter. That covers our synergy cards. We have some evasion now. We've already seen both of these. Abzan Falconer can give all of our creatures with +1/+1 counters flying, and Headliner Scarlet will enter and we choose a player, and none of their creatures can block that turn. So that's good evasion for our creatures. We also have 2 cards in our Firebending section. We've seen Sozin's Comet, which gives all of our creatures Firebending 5 until end of turn, but we also have Sun Warriors. Sun Warriors is 2, a red and a white, for a 3/5 human warrior ally. This is the only other ally on the deck besides Zuko, which is going to be relevant later. And it also, like Zuko, has Firebending X, but X for them is the number of creatures we control, which can be quite high. Which is great because Sun Warriors is also a mana sink for us. Helps us with our Firebending, or rather gets a lot of Firebending based on our creatures, and we can use its mana and the mana we get from Zuko in this ability. We pay 5 and we make a 1/1 white ally creature token. So we can get more allies than just Sun Warriors and Zuko. We'll see why that's relevant soon. Besides 1/1 tokens, yeah, why not? So that covers our Firebending section. We were just talking about mana sinks, so let's look at our mana sinks. Secure the Wastes is an instant. It's X and a white for an instant that makes X 1/1 white warrior creature tokens. So it's instant speed, so we want to be able to use this as a mana sink when we have a whole lot of Firebending mana in our pool. We're only having to spend 1 white in addition to it, and we get a lot of tokens that Zuko is going to be able to put counters on every time we have permanents enter from exile or cast spells from exile. So Secure the Wastes is a nice way to use up our mana like that. Bannon, of course, lets us sink 1 mana whenever we attack into a discard and draw effect that also lets us play creature spells from our graveyard as long as they got there from somewhere other than the battlefield. We do want to make sure that we layer this, we sequence this properly. So if we have an attack and we're attacking with Zuko, we want Zuko's ability to resolve first, his Firebending, so that we put that Firebending mana in our pool, and then have Bannon's ability to resolve so that we can spend that Firebending mana to discard and draw. Just worth noting how to sequence that, or how to order that properly, I should say. Much like Secure the Wastes, we have Grand Crescendo. Grand Crescendo is X and double white for an instant that makes X citizens. These are the green and white citizen creature tokens from New Capenna, and gives all of our creatures indestructible until end of turn. So we're making 1/1 creatures. They are a different color and creature type than the Secure the Wastes ones, but otherwise these are the same spell, except that Grand Crescendo costs 1 more white, and that gives all of our creatures indestructible until end of turn. So it's not just a great way for us to get a bunch of tokens out. We can just spend double white with X equals 0 whenever we need to keep our creatures alive, and it will just make all of our creatures indestructible. Pretty good. Dark Apostle has a 3 generic mana and tap ability, so that's 3 mana we can sure spend to sink our mana. Next we have Fire Nation Archers. This is 3 and a red for a 3/4 human archer with reach, so it can block flyers, and for 5, it deals 2 damage to each opponent, and we make a 2/2 red soldier creature token. So kind of an interesting combination of Sun Warriors. We spend 5 and get a token, but it's a 2/2, and we're also burning our opponents, and that 2/2 is a red creature, so sort of like Iraxa. Yeah, Fire Nation Archers is doing a bunch of different things at once. We've seen the Sun Warriors, of course. We can make allies with its activated ability, and Wand of Wonder has another activated ability of its own that lets us cast spells from exile, as long as they're instants and sorceries. So yeah, pretty nice. Those are our mana sinks. Let's look at all the ways we can make tokens in this deck. 32 cards in the deck, and 10 ways to make tokens. We've seen a lot of them. Secure the Wastes, of course, makes 1/1s, so does Grand Crescendo. PNLR makes 1/1 Thopters with flying. Fire Nation Archers can make 2/2 soldiers in addition to burning our opponents. Iraxa makes 2/2 red aliens, which aren't soldiers, but they seem nice. Sun Warriors makes these 1/1 allies. Quintorius makes 3/2 red and white spirits. Rabble Rousing makes the same kind of 1/1 green and white citizens that Grand Crescendo does. Virtue of Loyalty can, with its Ardenvale Fealty instant, make us a 2/2 Vigilant Knight, and Pegasus Guardian at the end step can make 1/1 flying Pegasus creature tokens. So lots and lots of tokens that we can continually pump out. With all of these cards, in fact, except for these two, Grand Crescendo and Secure the Wastes, and Virtue of Loyalty only makes a token once. So yeah, those are our tokens. Let's talk about how we do counters beyond just getting them from our commander. We've seen almost all of these. Aranya puts a counter on one of our creatures when we attack, and it cares about she cares about modified creatures. Kamiya Celebration puts a counter on one of our creatures whenever we cast a spell from Exile, and Virtue of Loyalty puts a counter on all of our creatures and untaps them at our end step. Lae'zel, Vlaakith's champion, I haven't played Baldur's Gate 3, so forgive me, is 2 and a white for a 3/3 legendary Gith warrior that says if we would put one or more counters on a creature or planeswalker we control, or on ourselves, we put that many +1 of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. So Lae'zel is sort of a hardened scales, but not just for +1/+1 counters, just for any counters on our creatures and on our planeswalkers. Lae'zel is here not to put counters on things, but to make sure that when we put counters on them, we get more. Especially nice if Lae'zel's in play and we trigger Zuko, because then Zuko's ability puts 2 counters on everything. Pretty sweet. Those are the counters cards that we have. Let's take a look at our cards that will protect us or our creatures or permanents. Airbender Ascension, of course, can protect us because it will flicker something at the end step. That's not really superlative protection, but it's nice. Grand Crescendo, of course, can make all of our creatures indestructible. Eerie Interlude and Cosmic Intervention have their own different versions of slow flickering things. Touch the Spirit Realm also slow flickers an artifact or a creature of ours if we channel it. Restoration Angel just does a regular flicker when it enters, and so does the Rescue the Full instant on Pegasus Guardian. So flickering, indestructible, airbending, that's how we do. The last section of spells is our recursion section. We only have one in the actual deck, but there are, like I mentioned before, more in our considering section below the deck list. And it's Quintorius being able to bring back with his ultimate any number of target cards in our graveyard and giving us mana so that we can play them this turn. That covers every one of the spells in our deck. We're going to do what we always do and talk about our land base now. We're running 15 basics, a little low for what I normally run, but we are running a 3-color deck, and we've got a lot of nice fixing in our other lands. This is not a perfect proportion based on the proportions of our pips in our spells, but it works totally fine for us. And I'm always nervous if I wanted to run fewer swamps than this, and I probably should in terms of proportionality, but we want to make sure we get Zuko into play on turn 3. So I wanted to shore up our black mana a little bit since we're mostly a red and white deck. This proportion works pretty well. We are running 6 fixing lands, starting with Command Tower. This is a land that comes in untapped and will tap for 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity, which is, again, like the Arcane Signet, it taps for white, black, or red in this deck. Untapped Tri-land, yeah, obviously we're going to include that. We're also running Exotic Orchard. Exotic Orchard is an untapped land that adds 1 mana of any color that a land an opponent controls could produce. So typically, this is going to be an untapped duel for us. It might be an untapped tri-land, of course, if our opponents are running white, red, and black, but it's pretty unlikely that our opponents are going to be running just green and blue. There's going to be at least 1 other color in there, hopefully 2, maybe all 3. So a nice untapped land that we don't know what it'll produce, but it'll probably help us. We are running Path of Ancestry, which is very much like Command Tower, except it comes in tapped. It makes 1 mana of any color in our commander's color identity, so a tapped tri-land, it's fine. But when we use this mana to cast a creature spell that shares a creature type with our commander, we scry 1. Zuko is a human noble ally. We have only 1 other ally in this deck, but we have 13 other humans. Pretty sweet. There's only 1 noble, which is Zuko. So Path of Ancestry is going to be able to give us plenty of scries, especially when we cast our commander, because, obviously, Zuko shares creature types with himself. Next is Temple of the False God. I know not everyone likes this card, but I think it works great for the kind of budget decks that I build, or the budget of decks I build. This is an untapped land that taps for 2 colorless mana, so it's a soul ring, a soul land, except we cannot activate it unless we control 4 other lands or more, because that's 5 or more lands including itself. So this is not great if it's in our opening hand and we only have like 1 other land in our opening hand, but if we get it a little bit later into the game, if it's in play turn 5 or later, we're probably sitting pretty. being able to get a little bit of acceleration that only accelerates us after the first few turns of the game is not bad. We also have 2 soft fetches. We're running Shattered Landscape, which can do several things for us. It comes in untapped and taps for colorless. We can also tap it and sacrifice it to search for a basic mountain, plains, or swamp and put that on the battlefield tapped and shuffle, so it's Evolving Wilds for our 3 colors. Or if we really want to, we can cycle it for Mardu mana, which means while it's in our hand, we pay a red, a white, a black, discard it, and we draw a card. That seems expensive, but if we need it later on, it's worth having it. Finally, we have Myriad Landscape. Myriad Landscape comes in tapped, and it taps for colorless. Or we can pay 2, tap, and sack it to search our library for up to 2 basic lands that share a land type. That means in this deck, 2 basic plains, 2 basic mountains, or 2 of our 3 basic swamps. We put them on the battlefield tapped and we shuffle. So even though this comes in tapped, it requires us to pay mana and tap it and sack it, and then the lands we find also come in tapped. This is us making 1 land drop and eventually having 2 lands in play. So it's slow, but it is ramp. And it fixes us because we can definitely find 2 of the land we're looking for that we need the most. That covers our fixing lands. We're running all 3 pain lands. These all work the same way except they have different colors. These pain lands are just like those signets we saw, but they are untapped lands. They tap for colorless or 1 of 2 colors if we're willing to let it do a damage to us. Everything I said about these signets is true about these. It's worth it to take the damage for this mana if we really need the mana, the colored mana. Otherwise, we just use this for colorless, no big deal. Battlefield Forge makes red and white, Keys of Koilos makes white and black, and Sulphurous Springs makes black and red. Love Sulphurous Springs. I used to play in the 90s with the demon in the hot tub of the Sulphurous Spring. Anyway, very cool. We're running all 3 pathways because I really like the pathways. These pathways work like this. Blightstep Pathway is an untapped land that taps for black, but if we want, we could play it on its backside as Seer Step Pathway, and it taps for red. Once we make the choice, it's on the battlefield. We can't flip it over on the battlefield, and we're not running any bounce lands in this deck, so we're not going to be able to reset it, but it's going to be one of the 2 colors we need the most in the time we need it most. So there you go. Blightstep Pathway is black or red, Bright Climb is white or black, and Needle Verge is red or white. We're running all 3 Scry lands as well, because we have a lot of cards that exile cards from the top of our library. We want to be able to have a little bit of selection with that. Temple of Malice is the temple we're going to use as an example. It enters tapped. It taps for 1 of 2 colors. This is black or red, and when it does, we scry 1. So this is a guaranteed scry when it comes in, as opposed to Path of Ancestry, which scries only when we use its mana for a creature that shares a type with our commander, a subtype that is, a creature type. So we're going to get more scrying, probably, off of our Path of Ancestry, but this is a guaranteed scry when the Temple comes in. Temple of Malice taps for red or black, Temple of Silence for white or black, and Temple of Triumph for red or white. All are very nice. And if you wanted to upgrade these, you sure could upgrade to a Surveil land. That would be okay. You'd be able to get a little bit more selection, and yeah, that seems nice. Just like if you wanted to upgrade these pain lands, you could upgrade to shock lands. That way, they're either coming in tapped and never doing damage to you, or they're going to do 2 damage to you, or rather you lose 2 life immediately, but they come in untapped and you never lose life from them again. Good upgrade. We're running Nomad Outpost. This is the tri-land that taps for our 3 colors, so it's another tapped command tower, essentially. If we wanted to upgrade this, we could upgrade to the Savai Triome, which is the same as this, except it has basic land types, and it cycles for 3 generic mana. Finally, we're running 7 utility lands. Demolition Field is in here because you have to have, I think, 1 source of land destruction in your deck, just to be able to answer problematic lands. If your opponent's playing a Rogue's Passage and they have a Voltron deck and they're just attacking in unblockably, you got to make it so they can't do that. If they're running a Maze of Ith and stopping Zuko from being able to do any damage and we want to be able to hit, we want to be able to take out a problematic non-basic land. So Demolition Field comes in untapped, taps for colorless, but we can pay 2, tap and sack it to destroy a non-basic land that an opponent controls. That opponent then gets to search their library for a basic and put it on the battlefield untapped and shuffle. And so do we. So neither us nor they are down a land. We both just have a basic in play, assuming we had more basics in our library. But the problematic land is off the battlefield. It's not mass land denial, it's just targeted land removal, and that's totally fine. Next up is the Fire Nation Palace. This is where Zuko lives now, Fire Lord Zuko. This is a land that enters tapped unless we control a basic land. So we've got 15 basics in our library, so it's possible. It taps for red, and we can pay 1 in a red and tap it, and target one of our target creatures gains Firebending 4 until end of turn. So this is another way for us to give Firebending. It also is worth mentioning that this does not say target creature you can... Oh, it does say target creature you control. Pardon me. I was like, I'm sure it says you control, but I didn't see it. Nope, it's right there. There you go. So it can give us a little bit of Firebending, which we can add on top of Zuko if we want to. Next is the Jasmine Dragon Tea Shop, where not just Zuko worked, but the very final scene of the series isn't the sort of montage of everyone ending their journey. It's everyone back together in the Jasmine Dragon. So we've got Zuko and Iroh doing what they do best. This is an untapped land that taps for colorless. We can also tap it for 1 mana of any color, but only to cast an ally spell or activate an ability of an ally source. So this is not relevant in this deck, but we sure can use this to fix our mana for Zuko and for the other ally that we have. Finally, we can pay 5 and tap it to make a 1/1 ally creature token. So if we really have a bunch of mana and we need to use it up, which we often will, because during combat we're making a lot of mana with Firebending thanks to Zuko, we can pump that into Jasmine Dragon Tea Shop and give ourselves another little friend. Next is Lindblum, Industrial Regency, from the Final Fantasy set. This is a land with an adventure. So we can play it as a land. It's a town that enters tapped, taps for red. Or we can play it as a instant speed adventure, meaning then the land will go to Exile and we can play it as our land drop from Exile, which will trigger Zuko. And this Mage Siege creates a Black Mage, which is a 0/1 Black Wizard creature token with whenever you cast a non-creature spell, this token deals 1 damage to each opponent. So it gives us a little token, which we can certainly make bigger and bigger and bigger with Zuko, but really we just care about the fact that we have a lot of non-creature spells. I mean, we're running 32 creatures, but we have plenty of other non-creatures as well. And we're going to be able to trigger that Black Wizard and ping our opponents each time we do. Next, we are running Rogue's Passage because we're not trying to necessarily win with commander damage, but we want to make sure that if we have a big creature, Zuko or otherwise, we're not going to lose it in combat, and we can just get in with our damage. So Rogue's Passage comes in untapped, taps for colorless, or we can pay 4 and tap it, and target creature can't be blocked this turn. This land does say target creature, not target creature you control. So we can use this politically. We can say, hey, opponent A, if you attack opponent B before blockers, I'll make your attacker unblockable. And they might say, yeah, okay, seems good. And we, of course, make a deal so that they're not going to come at us somehow. We, of course, don't activate Rogue's Passage until they've already declared the attacker, because we don't want to make a creature unblockable and then have them attack us with it. That wouldn't be great. But we want to get something out of that deal. Rogue's Passage is a good way we can make that happen. We're running Vault of the Archangel, just because we have a lot of ways to sort of hurt ourselves, but really because lifelink is great, and being able to use it in our deck in a way that costs some mana, we can use that as a mana sink for ourselves. So it comes in untapped, taps for colorless, or we can pay 2, a white and a black, and all of our creatures get Death Touch and lifelink until end of turn. So, like I say, we can use 2 of our Firebending mana on that, and then a white and a black and tap it. And we do that before blocks, let's say, which means now all of our creatures do have lifelink, but they also have Death Touch. And Death Touch, as I've said in the past, is not evasion, but sometimes it can act like it. Because our opponents look at our creatures and say, okay, yes, maybe we can kill some of these creatures, but unless our creatures are indestructible, there's no way we're going to be able to block and not lose our creatures in the process. So it's Commander, I've got 40 life, I'll just take the damage. I don't want to take all this damage, but it's better than losing my creatures in the process. So Death Touch becomes either a removal effect or an evasion effect. It's pretty nice. And the lifelink on top of it can't hurt either, especially when we're spending mana that we got for free thanks to Zuko. Finally, we have Windbrisk Heights. This is a hideaway land. It's just like that hideaway spell that we saw earlier. It enters tapped. It has Hideaway 4, of course, so it works the same way. Look at the top 4, exile 1 face down under the land, put the rest on the bottom in a random order. Windbrisk Heights comes in tapped, it taps for white. But if we attacked with 3 or more creatures this turn, we can pay a white and tap Windbrisk Heights to play the exiled card without paying its mana cost. Again, it's play, which means we can play a land if we put a land under it, as long as we have not made our land drop for that turn. But particularly nice because we're trying to go wide and tall with this deck. So being able to get a free extra card and from exile, which triggers Zuko, so as long as we're doing this before damage, we're getting all the counters on our creatures and being able to get the extra damage from it. This can even be stacked in such a way so that we can get those counters on Zuko before the Firebending trigger resolves, the way that I've described before. So yeah, Windbrisk Heights can really help us here. And that sums it up. Again, I'm releasing new Avatar Commander decks every Thursday through mid-January when the Lorwyn Eclipsed set drops. So let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a specific Avatar Commander or deck style. Thanks for watching, everyone. Make sure to like and subscribe, ring that bell, and remember, Magic is fun. You should play more Magic.